Oh, are you kidding me? You actually went live? Oh my God. Okay, well, I moved to a spot where I didn't intend to do this because I was going to tell everyone that it's not working. Can anyone hear me? Is sound actually coming through? Okay, well, literally, I kept getting error messages that live streaming wasn't available. So let me go back to my live streaming area. I'm sorry, this might make you all dizzy. I was about to literally write a message that said, sorry, live streaming isn't working according to YouTube, but okay. Rather than doing a live chat for my elliptical cross trainer. Okay. I hate technology so much. Like literally my dream for the creative Contessa is to make this business endeavor so profitable that I can hire someone who only handles all the tech and I never have to think about camera settings or camera placement or wires or adapters ever again in my life. Like that is my dream because I hate technology so much. It bores me to tears. Modern tech anyway bores me. Yeah, okay. So people who are here, please feel free to go ahead with your questions. Yeah, I've never had these problems before. I've done dozens of live streams. I've never had YouTube refuse to acknowledge my camera, attach my cameras, my microphones, and then tell me live stream wasn't available, and then also tell me that sound wasn't working, even from internal. So there's some kind of weird ghost in the machine this morning. Yeah, I am sitting in front of Louis, as they say, hearing in French. I have all of, for those of you who don't know, I have a tapestry collection of like 70 tapestries in sizes from tiny all the way up to size of walls. Most of them are in storage right now, but I do have 5 tapestries with me, and this is one of them. Yeah, this one I actually take with me when I travel to medievalist events and set up. Yeah. Yeah, well, during the pandemic, when I was trapped in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and unable to leave the United States of America, which I don't like. Actually, I hate being in America. And I got stranded in New Mexico during the pandemic and couldn't leave the country. So I had to bring medieval to me. So I started buying reproduction tapestries in mass from eBay. So that's how I ended up with a collection of 70 because I literally covered the entire inside of my house in tapestries in a true medieval fashion. But unfortunately, when we came to Korea, a lot of our stuff had to go into storage. And our apartment, of course, in Korea is not quite as big as our apartment or our house in Albuquerque. And also, when you rent an apartment, I don't know, but landlords get really upset when you start nailing things into the walls. So our ability to hang tapestries is limited. Yeah, tapestry goals. Yeah. So tips on buying reproduction medieval tapestries. This is a good topic. So first off, you want to actually not go for new ones. The new ones are made from polyester and acetate. They're low quality. They're expensive. Don't go for companies selling reproductions that are new, like manufactured now. They're also manufactured in China, really low quality. What you want to do is go onto eBay and look for tapestries. Medieval reproduction tapestry should be your search. You can also do Lady in the unicorn tapestry. But what you want is to make sure you click on used and not new because it's the used ones that you want, because the used ones were the ones woven 40 plus years ago that people who are now grandparents and or deceased, when they went to Europe, they bought these as souvenirs and brought them back with them. And this was back when they were still producing these with quality on linen and wool grounds, lined nicely, super high quality. So that's what you want. And you can get them for super inexpensive. Yeah, exactly. Polyester is a total fire hazard. Polyester will screw your life up, whether it's on your skin or on your walls. Whereas wool is a natural flame retardant, and linen will just kind of burn at a normal temperature if your house catches on fire. Polyester will make your house burn really hot, which is probably why a lot of modern homes burn so badly, because they've got those nasty poly or petrochemical carpets everywhere. Oh yeah, neo-Gothic. That's yeah. So Contessa question is, do I use neo-Gothic revival furniture as a Contessa's medieval knockoff tip? Cheapo similars, yes, cheapo similars or cheapo replicas, depending on your option. Yes. So I definitely have in storage revival neo-Gothic furniture. So for those who don't know, the Victorians in the second half of the 19th century grew super fascinated with medieval culture, and so they started reproducing or creating Gothic style furniture, neo-Gothic, that's actually more ornate than original Gothic furniture. So if you develop an eye like mine, I can always point out the difference between a revival piece and an original piece. But it is definitely close enough and will probably be less expensive than paying someone to modern to make you a reproduction, say medieval credenza, a medieval sideboard. And there are a lot of antique stores in Europe and in the United States who have lots of these pieces, and no one wants them anymore because everyone wants like IKEA chic, which means they tend to be pretty reasonable. So I was able to get a pretty decent sideboard, which if you look in some of my dance videos from more than a year ago, if you look at my dance videos from more than a year ago, you'll see the sideboard off to the side in profile. You can see the side of it. It's really pretty. And it's, yeah, we used it as a cabinet. We used it to display some of our nice plate. My cat loved sleeping on it. It was also where we kept the loot. And it cost, it's going to sound crazy, but it only cost $800. It's made of oak. The having someone make that with all the carving and tracery would have been several $1,000s. So yeah, I definitely say if you're looking for medieval style furniture, but you can't afford to pay a carpenter to make it, then the neo-Gothic revival pieces that are in many antique stores, definitely a good way to go. Yeah, exactly. So the sideboards I'm talking about, if you ever look in 15th century illuminations, especially like Annunciation scenes or feast scenes, you'll see these beautiful cabinets with lots of beautiful silver and gold plate displayed on them. And you can get those, they made those in the thousands, tens of thousands in the 19th century. And they're all still around. And there's one antique store in Amarillo, Texas, actually, that apparently has an entire warehouse of them. And you can, yeah, you can get them for, you know, $500 to $500 to $2,000, depending on the size. Some of them are very big because they were designed for grand homes that no one has anymore. But yeah, cheapo similar tip, antique revival Gothic furniture. Now, cheap is relative, right? I understand that students on a shoestring budget maybe can't afford $1,000 sideboard. Cool, that's fine. But for those who have a little bit of a higher budget, you know, that's a good option. Yeah, exactly. And depending on so the comment was just every professional vendor was $2,000 and up, and I got it at a crappy antique shop for $200. Yeah, depending on where you are, you might be able to get it for less, and especially if you have a crappy antique shop that doesn't know what they have, then they might sell it for less expensive. Same thing with these tapestries. I actually, one of the biggest ones I got, which was literally, it was like 12 feet by 6 feet. 15 feet by 6 feet. It was immense. So like roughly 3 meters by 5 meters, very roughly. It was, or 2 meters by 5 meters, sorry, 2 by 5 meters. I got it from a charity store of, you know, like a Christian charity store for $200. If you buy it new, it would go for 3,000. So you can really sometimes find some great deals in places, especially in the smaller shops that maybe are less savvy about what they actually have in their stores. Yeah. I don't know the name of the vendor in Amarillo, Texas. It was 2 years ago. Let me see if I can, if that's still in my purchase history on eBay. Sorry, this is going to make the camera shake a little bit, guys. I apologize. eBay. I go to eBay for everything. I'll be honest. Nearly all of my cheapo similars, all of my thrift shopping, almost all of the good finds I have really found on eBay. My tapestries, furniture. We can also talk in a moment about getting thread and materials on eBay, because here's what happens. A lot of grandmothers die, and you know, it's, and I know that sounds sexist, but for the most part, it's probably going to be grandmothers from my grandmother's era. they die and they leave these vast troves of creative materials. Not be able to get into my eBay account right now because I might not know the password anymore. Nope, I don't know the password anymore, apparently. Oh, apparently I do. So what happens is these people die and they leave these vast troves of crafts and supplies, and they're super high quality because they were bought decades ago before things started getting cheap. And then their heirs inherit them, and they don't sew, they don't embroider, they don't do any of those things. And so they just donate them to charity shops generally. And so they end up frequently on eBay because a lot of charity shops now sell their goods on eBay instead of actually, in addition to having a storefront, they also sell them on eBay because they've realized that it expands their customer base. And so you can get silk thread, large collections of silk embroidery floss, silk buttonhole thread, silk sewing thread, silk thread in all gauges, basically, on eBay for way less than if you bought it new, even if you can find it new, because people are producing it less and less. Orders. It's been a while since I purchased this, so no, I can't. Unfortunately, the order is too long ago. Sorry. I can't. I made the order too long ago, and eBay only keeps order history for so long, apparently. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the thing is that with when you want cheapo similars, eBay is really the place to go. The key is click on used under condition, because otherwise, oh goodness, you're going to just get shown all this new cheap made in China crap that's made with chemicals that are toxic for you, but also the dye stuffs are cheap and they come off easily on your fingers on both the fabrics and the threads. So if you're looking for silk thread, linen thread, wool yarn, silk yarn, whatever, eBay is the place you want to go. But under your search, just click on condition used. And sometimes dead stock. Use the search term dead stock in quotes, because dead stock is the best. Dead stock, if you don't know, dead stock is what happens when a store closes and literally their trove, their store, their warehouse of new stock doesn't get sold and it just sits. And then eventually someone, usually they buy it in a lot sale or something. And so dead stock was made a long time ago, manufactured when manufacturing standards were much higher and expectations were much higher. And it's still new, it's still in packaging, but it can no longer be sold as brand new because it's not new. So it gets sold at a severe discount. You can get silk stockings this way, ones from the 30s and 40s, silk thread, fabric, tapestries. Dead stock tapestries are also a thing. This one is a dead stock tapestry from France. Actually, there was an antique dealer in France who deals in dead stock reproduction tapestries on eBay. So, yeah. That is, that's kind of a general recommendation if you're trying to look for medieval items or replica items or replica-like items. eBay, it's a trove, but make sure you click on used in the condition. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, tapestry bowls. Yeah, you should always have a travel tapestry if you're going to medievalist events, so that you can always help contribute to the ambiance. Now, some of you may or may not know, but I end up flying to almost all events that I attend, because in Korea, there aren't many medievalist events unless I run them. And so that means I've had to develop certain skills and travel hacks for being able to bring enough of my things with me to events. And so, I have a kind of, this is my travel tapestry, because this one is actually silk screened, but it's silk screened on a linen wool ground that is heavily woven. Those kinds of tapestries are less expensive than, say, one that's actually woven in an alouin point, which is the tapestry technique from the Middle Ages. And I do have none of those here. Those are all in storage. But those are definitely more expensive than the silk screen ones. They're also heavier. So this is much lighter than if it had been actually tapestry woven, so to say. So this one I can travel with. It only weighs a couple of pounds, 5 pounds, where versus the 15 or 20 pounds it would weigh if it were actually properly tapestry woven. Okay, other questions for me this morning? Oh, wait, I just saw a comment. In the army, I crawled through burning napalm wearing several wool uniforms very fast. Yeah, that sounds like something the Swedish army would have you do. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, but wool is the reason that comment is there is because, oh, good morning, Catherine. I don't know if you're still on. Hopefully you are. The reason all military uniforms used to be made only of wool is that manifold. One, wool repels stains and odors. Wool breathes, especially if you're not wearing boiled wool. Boiled wool is a different topic. It's designed to not breathe. It's designed to insulate purely. But normal weaves of wool breathe, repel odors and stains, and are naturally fire retardant. So it's very hard to burn wool. It will just sort of self-extinguish, which is the great thing about wool. And that's why cooks in kitchens throughout all of history until very recently always wore wool. Not linen, because linen will burn. I mean, they wore linen under things, but their over things were wool. And yeah, you think, well, you're cooking really literally in this blazing hearth. Why are you going to wear wool? Well, because it will prevent you from dying a horrible death. Because up until recently, fire burns, even if they didn't kill you immediately, probably meant death from septicemia, because you would contract an infection and you would die from that much of your body being exposed. Okay, well, let's not get too in depth into medical history, shall we? Although I was watching The Good Place the other day, and when they get up into The Good Place and they're talking to some of the people there, they meet this Phoenician gentleman who says, yeah, I got a scratch and died from an infection. And that is pretty true. It's amazing what the world was like before antibiotics and antibiotic cream, and before the general concept of just using soap to wash things like your hands and wounds. Let's see. There was another good, I was shopping for something and I thought the other day that would make a really good tip for buying medievalist crap. No, I don't remember what it was. Oh, no, that was it. So for people who are a bit more industrious, shall we say, there was a comment under my medieval cheapo similar supercut of seeing if you have a local community college or community center in your town, your city, where you can actually use the woodworking equipment. And if you are willing to do it, then you could probably actually make your own, wooden trencher for pretty inexpensively, especially if you go and get some scrap wood from your local, whoever is your local lumber vendor. Often they sell small pieces of even oak for very little, because for most projects, you can't do much with a piece of oak that's this size, but it makes a great trencher. So the suggestion was go check out the discount bin of wood at your local lumber yard. That might be your home improvement store, Lowe's, Home Depot, OB in Germany, whatever your local home improvement store is. See if they've got some decent cheap oak, and then see if you have a local community center that has woodworking equipment that you can use for relatively little. So that was a good tip for people who are maybe creative and creative and industrious and aren't necessarily looking to buy everything, but want an idea for how to make things inexpensively. Oh, I know a lot about medieval food. Okay, so medieval food. Medieval food, I would actually say, just as a point of comparison, medieval food was much more interesting than modern food. Modern cuisine got boring because of Louis XIV. Because Louis XIV, started off as an extravagant king, and then in sort of the last third of his life, he found Jesus, basically. And he started living this very austere lifestyle. And that basically changed the food that he served at Versailles, because it went from being extravagant and flavorful with all these exotic spices to be very simple. And then, of course, all of the palaces across all of the royal courts across Europe started copying. That's called La Nouvelle Cuisine, if you've ever heard that term. And then, of course, when all the French chefs got basically fled the French Revolution, in the late 18th century, they scattered about Europe and they spread La Nouvelle Cuisine to all levels of society. So food got really boring after that. Um, so the medieval food, for even for the lower classes, yeah, there were lots of pottages, which is basically a kind of stew, and it was seasonal. So whatever was available in the season is what you ate. If you were, say, a medieval sort of peasant. Now remember, peasant doesn't necessarily mean poor. There were some very wealthy peasants, especially after the Black Death. And so that doesn't mean that they didn't have access to spices, and maybe they only use them for special occasions, cloves and cinnamon and cubebs and ginger and galangal and grains of paradise. All of those sorts of things, were probably, peasants could maybe afford to buy them in small quantities, especially, like I said, in the later Middle Ages, and use them on special occasions. But otherwise, lower classes, pottages made of local herbs and greenery that was available in that time of year, vegetables that were available in that time of year. Probably salted meat would have been available, was available. No, I know it was available to the lower classes. Upper class food was incredible. All sorts of spices, sweet and savory combined, sour also. Instead of sauces made from butter and cream, sauces were usually often reductions of wine and lots of spices. So very, very flavorful and very bright. Colors were very important. So, they used a lot of natural food dyes, many of which are actually toxic, like alkanet, to turn things red. Saunders, which is also not great to consume in any large quantity. Saffron was used a lot to make things yellow and give things flavor. Lots of, dried fruit was added to a lot of things, raisins, currants, and sometimes they call them raisins of Corinth, actually. So you always count on the French to run our fun. Well, actually, so the funny thing is that a lot of medieval food, the best medieval food, I would say, actually, a lot of it came from France. And, a lot of the English cookbooks are filled with French recipes because they were so good. And you can tell that because a lot of the English recipes have these horribly bastardized French names. And you can actually pinpoint the original source, the original French cookbooks from which they were derived. So actually medieval French cuisine was like the top, at the peak of its game, I would say. In all of Europe, medieval French cuisine was probably the most innovative and the most delicious. Maybe not necessarily because of France. By French, I'm talking about modern day France. Remember that in the Middle Ages, what is modern day France was a whole bunch of different polities, including the most powerful and great polity of all time, Burgundy, which was this close to becoming the powerhouse of Europe rather than France or Germany. But twist of fate in 1477 ended that. So yeah, medieval cuisine, no matter where you were in Europe, was very interesting and flavorful and varied. And medieval cuisine was also heavily influenced by the time of year. Seasonality was a thing. In the winter, you would actually, at the end of the season, you'd slaughter animals. And so you'd actually have meat for the winter. But you'd also end up with a lot of preserved vegetables in the winter. So things like sauerkraut, fermented and preserved vegetables, dried vegetables, those would be available sort of throughout the winter. And then in the spring, the spring would kind of be your leanest time because you don't have new animals yet. And you've gone through all the animals you've already slaughtered. Vegetables aren't available yet. So kind of spring is when things might get, if things are going to get desperate, is when things might get desperate food wise. Interesting. Bottled water. Diluting bottled water with red wine made your tongue black. That is interesting. Was it carbonated water? Or was it from a mineral spring? That's interesting because, of course, in the Middle Ages, so that's a practice of drinking. Wine was consumed in large quantities, but no one drank it undiluted, people. There's this idea that the Middle Ages was this alcoholic time. No, people needed to really be on the top of their game to survive in the Middle Ages. There wasn't time and luxury for alcoholism. So wine was heavily, or non-functional alcoholism. So wine was diluted at least half and half, and often 3 to 1. So some of you may have seen, I posted that the Duke of Burgundy was famous for his temperance. Like it's noted by the chroniclers that he actually diluted his wine by 3 to 1. And so apparently Tommaso tried it and it made his tongue black. That's mineral spring water. Yeah, okay, well, mineral spring, maybe the minerals. Yeah, that's interesting. I know that wine turns my condotiero's lips purple. Yeah, so medieval food, very interesting, varied. There were pies, there were stews, there were roasts, there were pot roasts, lots of in the courts and the aristocratic circles, a lot was put into show. So, they had subtleties, which literally means you take a food and make it look like something it's not. So gingerbread would be turned into a castle, and medieval gingerbread is nothing like modern gingerbread. Medieval gingerbread is literally breadcrumbs, usually stale, with dried ginger and ground black pepper and a lot of honey until you make a paste, basically. And then you can actually use that to mold into other shapes. Kind of like marzipan, but with bread and honey and ginger. So you could actually use that to make castles and, whatever kind of theme your feast had that was promoting whatever propaganda you were trying to promote at the time. You could use gingerbread and marzipan to create these subtleties, these creations that were stunning. And as the Middle Ages were on, subtleties became immense and like basically complete theatrical productions where literally you'd have parade carts coming through the hall with pantomimes and singers and performers in costume and portraying some kind of specific theme or scene. When the Duke of Burgundy, and I think it was 1453, when Philip of Burgundy was trying to convince people to go on crusade to go and rescue Constantinople or take it back, he hosted what was called the Feast of the Pheasant. And the chroniclers recorded this in detail because it was an immense production. It's a 2-week-long feast where every day there was feasting and fighting and dancing. And every day had a different set of intermezzi in between the courses where, basically they were emotionally manipulating people into take up the cross and go and take Constantinople back from the Ottomans. And, there was one parade cart that basically a parade float that featured this entire castle, and there was a woman weeping who was representing ecclesia, the church, how she had been, she was shackled and chained, or it looked like an Ottoman kind of castle as they imagined an Ottoman castle to be. And ecclesia was weeping and singing how someone needed to come and save her. That sort of, pathos invoking production. Yeah. So food was complicated and interesting. And also not only did you follow the seasons, of course, the religious calendar impacted food immensely. So there were what people called Ember Days in English, which are days when you're supposed to basically fast. So no meat, no animal products. They were basically vegan days where you would eat vegetables and things made of almond milk instead of cheese and animal products and meat. And so the Ember Days were Wednesday and Friday in addition to Lent. And then there were other Ember Days too, depending specific feast days, holy days in the calendar, church calendar at that time were also Ember Days. So the season really, not only what was available, but what was on the religious calendar impacted what people ate pretty heavily. Now, that being said, there were certain places that apparently declared things like beaver to be a fish because it lived in water. So they were trying to get their red meat however they could. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about food before I move on to oh, yes, I do have some very good books on that. Before I move on to the next question, I'm going to be right back with, except I don't know where it is on my bookshelf. We're just getting our things back up and organized. Honey. Oh yeah. Honey was definitely a product that was available and used in medieval cuisine. Like I said, in gingerbread, honey was a primary flavor giver. They didn't, but honey was expensive. I mean, it was available, but they didn't have factory farming for anything in the Middle Ages. So it was still an expensive item. It was still, not available in massive quantities. So it wasn't used in everything. There aren't I actually can't think of many recipes that use honey. Specifically, we use it a lot in medicine, to sweeten, just to make the medicine go down. A lot of the pharmacopoeia from the Middle Ages have recepts, prescriptions, recipes for medicine, with honey in them. Yeah, there. I was, just thinking back through it. There's the dishes that we might consider sweet are often not sweetened with honey. They're actually sweetened with sugar, interestingly. Which doesn't mean anything. Remember, the cookbooks that have survived were aimed at a specific audience, and sugar would have been the more expensive, exotic import, because it was, until later in the Middle Ages, it had to be imported from the East. And even then, it was kind of only available. The production centers that were European were in the South, in the Mediterranean, because sugarcane is a tropical plant. So, in Northern Europe, sugar was a luxury item. So it makes sense that the recipes for sweet goods would feature sugar, because the cookbooks that have been handed down are nearly always aimed at an very upper class society. Recept in German too. Receipt, and then in Latin also. Oh gosh, recommendations for cooking related. Well, so in terms of books, in fact, I'm going to be producing a series of themed books in the Contessa's collection. So like, I'll do a cookbook themed episode, and a medieval life themed episode, and a correspondence themed episode. And we're going to stay tuned for that, because there are a couple of really good books, of which I think most people are unaware, that make medieval cuisine accessible, but don't assume that you're an idiot. By which I mean, they provide the original recipe in the original language, a translation of the recipe, and then a redaction for those who just want to do modern cooking, but also the cultural context. So there's some really good books there. So yes, I do have medieval recommendation books. And one of them, I can't think of it, because they all have very similar names. Like one is, I think, medieval cuisine in medieval France or something. But I mean, if you look that up, you're probably going to get a dozen or more books, none of which might be the one I'm talking about. And I don't want to dash away and go to my bookshelf and spend 10 minutes looking for it, because as I said, our books are still in the process of being reorganized. When the movers packed our things, they literally just threw things willy-nilly into boxes. So even though we had everything Dewey Decimaled, yes, I've got an extensive library that's Dewey Decimaled, we have to reorganize all the books. So that's a bit of a process. But yes, I will be coming out. Stay tuned for the Contessa's Book Corner, themed. That's coming up in future months. There are a lot. And I do have a couple of cooking videos, medieval cooking videos. I've got one on how to make almond milk, which got a really nasty comment on one of the SCA baronial groups, because some people are just nasty. A wrong comment, but a nasty comment. And then I did one on Alois de mutton, which are basically lamb meat rolls. So that's a 2-part series. I'm going to roll out a supercut of that this month, I think, because I did it as 2 parts originally. And now that it's done, I'm going to stick them together. So you just get all of the making of the Alois de mutton in one episode. Yeah, there's a lot of on my travel channel actually gets a lot more really misogynist ad hominem attacks than my creative content channel does. I mean, I don't know. There's some really unhappy people out there, and I trigger them for whatever reason. I think they think I'm a trust fund baby, and that I'm just traveling around because I'm privileged. Guys, I'm not a trust fund baby. I might dress nicely sometimes. I might speak in a certain way with a certain diction, but I come from solidly middle class background. No trust fund for me. That would be nice maybe, but honestly, I'm glad I'm not a trust fund baby, because it means I've actually had to work for what I have, and that means I appreciate what I have. Anyway, stepping off of that soapbox. The other question was, any good books that talk about 15th century Burgundy? Got this old Dutch to English translation that is pouring me to tears. Yes, there are some very good books on 15th century Burgundy. The one I recommend the most, of course, I'm casting about like it's just going to appear to me. why am I not telekinetic? There is one called Court, I think it's Court Life in 15 in the Low Countries, in Burgundy in the Low Countries. Let me just do this quickly. And it is a collection of chronicles. It is a collection of chronicles chronicles from chroniclers who chronicled life firsthand in Burgundy in the 15th and early 16th centuries. And so you actually get this window into life in the court, and from of all different aspects of the feasts, of the festivities, of like serious intrigue, as in plots to assassinate fellow courtiers, plots to assassinate the Duke and Duchess. I mean, it's like a soap opera. It's great. Burgundy Chronicles, Low Countries. That is my go-to book. My copy of that book is heavily dog-eared, because I've had it for years. And unfortunately, it is not, I don't think it's, last I checked, because of course it's not the kind of book that people exactly buy in large quantities. So it's very expensive. The last I checked, it was like $200 on Amazon because it's out of print. I thankfully got it when it was first released in Low Countries. Oh, there it is. Court and Civic Society in the Burgundian Low Countries. I will post this in the comments. Thank you, Google Foo. It's all about, and someone actually asked if I could do a video on how to successfully execute Google searches, because my Google Foo is very powerful, I've noticed. Okay, let me see. Were there magic books? Or Burnt with Pride? Oh, books on magic. So, medieval, here's the thing. Witch burning, that's a Protestant thing. That started with the Reformation. The Middle Ages was much, they only burned people for witchcraft in the Middle Ages if they were political opponents. Like, they didn't really burn actual practitioners of magic. So the Templars, there was the Duchess of Bedford, one of the Duchess of Bedford, I think her name was Catherine. She made some enemies, and they accused her of witchcraft. Jacquetta of Luxembourg, Duchess of Bedford, they accused her of witchcraft. But it was never about them actually doing witchcraft. It was always a tool just to punish political opponents in the Middle Ages. It's really not until the 16th century with the Reformation that they start actually burning witches. 16th and 17th century. Books on magic, though. There is something, and of course the witch's hammer came out about that time. There is something in my memory about that, but not as such, not as a separate thing. There's a couple of manuscripts that have been presented as such, but then it turns out that they were frauds. It was some modern person who created it and made it look like it was a medieval book on magic, but it actually wasn't. Let me see. Oh, is it on sale now for $23? Oh, that's good, because it wasn't. So the book on Court and Civic Society, yeah, it was like $200 a couple of years ago. So it looks like they may have done a reprint on it. So, oh no, temporarily out of stock. That's too bad. Although maybe not all of them are out of stock. Apparently there's a used copy for $63. Oh, one new from $530. That's great. Oh, that's the hardcover version. Yeah, the book on, if you can get a copy of Court and Civic Society in the Burgundian Low Countries, that's a really good one. It's a boring title. It sounds like it's going to be a snoozer, but I swear to you, it is literally like watching a Burgundian soap opera with your mind's eye. It's great. And it's the best image, the best way you're going to get an image of what actual court life was like and how people interacted. You can actually get a sense of the kind of titles they used for each other, how they addressed each other. They talk about dancing and feasting and festivities and tournaments and poisoning and baptism. The ritual of baptism, the ceremony that was involved in that, grand entrances, like when Margaret of York married Charles, known as the Bold or the Rash of Burgundy in 1468. There are chronicles in this book that describe her grand entry into Bruges and into Ghent, and the floats and parades that were hosted in her honor. So you can really get a sense of what medieval events were like, actually. Yeah, all kinds of fun details in an otherwise boring sounding book. Okay, if any other questions, LW, before you go? Let me know and I'll address them. Yeah, okay. So magic books, I'll have to look that up. I don't have any. I do have a very large collection of very wide-ranging books because I like books. Okay. Other questions? While you all think if you have other questions, on the topic of books of 15th century Burgundy, there are some good books on, there are some good biographies of the dukes by Richard Vaughan. He did a biography on each of the Valois dukes, John the Fearless, his father, Philip the Fearless, John the Fearless, Philip the Good, and Charles the Rash. Did I say Charles the Good? I always say that. It should have been Philip the Good in 1453. Anyway, Charles the Rash. Richard Vaughan did a very good series of biographies on them with direct quotes, entire excerpts from chronicles of the era. So you can also get a good feel for what life was like. Margaret of York, I've tried to find out so much about Margaret of York, and unlike the dukes, who seem to have left behind a lot of personal correspondence and about whose daily lives there seems to be so much information, the duchesses, it is much harder to find information about the duchesses of York and their daily lives, which is kind of sad to me because that's, as a woman, I'm interested in understanding their experience on a more personal level. And especially for Margaret of York, we know a lot about her. She was a bibliophile. She sponsored the production of so many amazing, gorgeous books and collected an immense library, actually, that I think is still in Brussels. I think it might be in the Bibliothèque in Brussels. It might be also in Dijon, though. Don't quote me on that. But she amassed this immense collection. And anytime you read a biography about Margaret of York, Duchess of Burgundy, Dowager Duchess of Burgundy, it will always talk about, there'll be a whole section of the book devoted to her bibliophilism, her love of books, and the way she was a patron of the arts and a patron of books. But it doesn't talk about her. It talks about the books she sponsored and the people who illuminated the books and the workshops that illuminated the books. And it's always, there's this big gap about the personality and the daily life of Margaret of York that I find very sad. Oh, welcome, Lady Justice Susan. Oh, should I just call you Lady Susan? Welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please pop it into the comments. We actually had a very rough start, so we've actually been doing this live stream for 43 minutes because the first one failed miserably. It's easy to find things about the Dukes of Burgundy. It's harder to find things about the Duchesses of Burgundy. And if you want to get into really deep level culture of Burgundy, like dance, there's actually 2 manuscripts from Burgundy about dance. Almost only what are called bastons, but they're dance manuals that will give you an idea of how people definitely danced in the duchy. For certain. So when they talk about they danced in the chronicles, these dance manuscripts will tell you exactly what they were doing when ever a chronicle says they danced. Yeah. Right. So any other questions about, anything? Spells to float books. I just saw that. That's funny. Let me just look through the comments here, make sure I didn't miss any questions. Yeah, if you are just joining, I think you should be able to scroll up through the chat and see what questions were asked. Oh, sewing. Yeah. So I do have the current state of the bodice with me. I was actually possibly going to be sewing during this chat if no one showed up. It was just going to be sewing with the Contessa, but people actually showed up and asked questions. So this is where the bodice is right now. I've attached the facing, what will be the binding around the edge, at least of the neckline, after cutting and sewing out a bunch of bias cut strips. So it's coming along well. I wish I had more time to devote to sewing, but it takes hours it takes almost as long to edit some of these videos as it does to sew the garments, because video editing is a very time consuming. So it's going very well. I'm optimistic that I might have this gown done by Pensick by August, a year from when it started, the 2-week project. Yeah. So we're up to the bodice, finishing up the bodice and the skirts. And then I have a whole bunch of other things I actually need to get started. We're attending a medievalist event in June in Europe, for those who are in the Society for Creative Anachronism. It's the 30-year anniversary of the Kingdom of Drachenwald, and I'm with some of my apprentices. I'm going to be leading dance there, and my condottiero needs new clothes. He only has one outfit, and he needs a couple more. So I'm going to be making another farsetto for him, and probably another giornea, maybe a choppa. So there's going to be some videos coming out about that, and we also plan on doing a dressing the condottiero series. So yeah, really busy on the sewing front, actually. Really busy on the everything front. I've also started doing live classes and workshops again, and I have to say it's so good to interact with real people in real time. Zoom classes are fine, videos are fine, but there is an energy you get from a live audience that you just don't get from the Zoom experience. Well, I mean, chaperones, let's be honest. The chaperone, for those who don't know, so the comment was, my chaperone makes me look like the idiot brother of Lawrence of Arabia, more layers needed in wool. Well, it was a first attempt. Yeah, so the chaperone is what is if people imagine a medieval male headdress, probably it's going to be a chaperone they'll imagine. It's only really a 15th century look, but it's sort of the round tube thing with this squid-like fringe kind of coming off of it. And what it actually was the cowled hood where they turned the hood part rolled that up and stuck it on their head like this, and then wrapped the lyra pipe sort of around to keep it in place. And then that eventually petrified into just a ring with squid-like thing coming off of it. And I'll be honest, I've seen some original chaperones. In fact, Philip the Good wearing one of them. It was pretty ridiculous looking. But, fashion, that's fashion. It can be ridiculous, and maybe it should be, What's life without a little bit of the ridicule, as they say? The chaperone is just the human urge to wear hats wrong. That is so true. It really is. It's the turning the baseball cap around backwards of the Middle Ages. The backwards baseball cap of the Middle Ages. That's true. I'm going to remember that going forward. Yeah, Drachenwald is definitely my home kingdom for those who are in the SCA. I was queen there. I lived there and played there for 12 years. And most of the SCA events I've attended even since leaving, in the last 9 years, most of them have been in Drachenwald, even though I live either in Korea or have been living in the United States in that time. Most of the events I've attended have still been there. So yeah, the kingdom has changed a lot. It's contracted. I was there from 2002 to 2014. Question was, when was I there? I need to start remembering to actually repeat these questions. Yep. So good long time, and I miss it a lot. Yeah. I still have all my friends who are still there. There's a lot of modern movement, even if you're not in the US military. A lot of people end up shifting and going other places. It's just the way of the world, economically speaking. Oh yeah, no, I was a child in 1992 to 94. I was definitely not. I was still in Delaware, my home state. Right. So, let's see. Other questions about sewing. Um, yeah, other than poking holes in my fingers a lot, all the projects seem to be going pretty well. My Burgundian hood project, which I should have also brought over, the hood for my Not a Hennin, it's mostly finished. There were some lessons learned there. I'm glad I only did a small one. Turned out pretty well. Some of the lessons learned were silk velvet sucks for sewing. It's awful. It just slides everywhere, even under pins and basting stitches. It still moves everywhere. And so my line of stitching looked like this after it was done. On one side, on the other side, it was straight. That was the fun part. Straight on one side, wonky on the other. And I ended up redoing the stitches lots and lots it was just a simple rectangle of silk velvet, really just a rectangle. Should have been really simple. Straight stitch there, straight stitch there, straight stitch there, straight stitch there, back stitch all the way. No, it was not that simple. And I ended up ripping out the stitches, multiple seams, multiple times before I realized that velvet is very forgiving, because when you turn it the other way out, you can't see the wonkiness because the pile of the velvet conceals it. Yay for fabric properties. Yeah. And in fact, we inherited a chaperone. Speaking, I know you aren't in my head. So I looked at the comments and I saw the chaperone again. So back to the topic of the chaperone. We actually inherited a chaperone, a nice green wool chaperone. I'm going to have more. Normally I have my condottiero here to go and fetch items for me when I need them, but he's at work, that bastard. How dare he go and earn a gainful living for us? So I don't have someone to go and fetch for me like I normally do. But yeah, hats make the ensemble, everyone. Remember, a person medieval person, excuse me, a person wearing a medieval hat but modern clothing is a medieval person wearing a modern costume. But a person wearing modern medieval clothing but no modern headgear is a modern person wearing a costume, wearing a medieval costume. That's the difference. Headgear is very essential. Even just a coif will completely transform your look from costume party to medieval person. Oh, let me see. I'd like to say there's plenty of time before Penzik, but as is usual, I was sewing at Gulf Wars because life happens. Yeah, so projects and project deadlines. It's really funny. Events like Penzik, for those who aren't in the SCA, it's a big medievalist event in Western Pennsylvania. Happens every year, starting on the last weekend in July for 2 weeks. Same schedule every year. It's not a surprise. And yet somehow I don't end up starting my projects for the next Penzik until June or July because, procrastination, it must have some evolutionary advantage because we humans seem very good at procrastination. So yeah, I get the whole, there's lots of time before Penzik, and yet somehow I still expect this new Gamora I will be putting the finishing stitches on the flight, and I think I'm flying Ethiopian Air to Penzik this year. I will be putting the finishing stitches on the plane in Addis Ababa on my way to the event. Because why would I finish it now? There's so many other things I can do with my time. But seriously, I actually, not only do I do all this content creation and teach classes, and I do editing also to earn some extra money, and the sewing, but we don't eat out. I cook a lot from scratch. Like every meal is cooked from scratch. We don't do processed food or pre-made food. So it occurred to me that I usually spend about 3 hours a day just cooking on average. In fact, I'm going to do at some point, probably this week, I'll just set it up. I'm just going to do a cooking with the Contessa, where if you all want to come and hang out with me while I cook, I'll just live stream my cooking. And it's going to be modern cooking. Well, I don't know. It'll be something. But anyone who wants to just come and hang out and cook, I'll be doing that. Yeah. So the comment is, so much truth about wearing a hat. I started out wearing veils and coifs because my hair is very short. Turns out I quickly learned that the hat truly makes the outfit an experience. Yeah. A lot of my Swedish Medievalist friends and Finnish medievalist friends have not only short hairstyles, but brightly colored hairstyles. I have one friend who does this wonderful rainbow thing with her hair. And she is very careful about covering up everything when she's at an event so that um, it doesn't distract, shall we say. Yeah, but coifs, covering your head has a very practical, which I cover in my Fun with Medieval Headwear. Wearing a coif, just a linen, what some people might call a bonnet, a linen bonnet on your head it has practical effects. For instance, in the sun, it will keep you cool because it will reflect the sunlight because it's white, but also it's linen, so you have the evaporative cooling effect. It will protect if you have a part. It will protect your part from sunburn. It will keep your hair clean because, especially at outdoor medievalist events, dust is a thing, and so it will help keep things cleaner for longer. There's a lot of and if it's really hot, you can actually soak your coif, your linen coif, no matter what its shape, soak it, and then put it on your head, and if the evaporative cooling will be enhanced because there'll be even more water to help whisk the air away, the heat away from your head. The comment is, finishing your projects more than 2 weeks before an event ruins all the fun of pre-event prep. I can't disagree with that. There's a certain adrenal rush to trying to finish a project in a contracted period of time. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the evolutionary advantage. It's actually the adrenal rush that causes us to procrastinate, because at some level we know if we wait until the last minute, we will have the extra boost of the thrill of completing the task. Whereas if you finish it in advance, then maybe you just feel like you're left with this void afterwards. In German, they have this expression, before the project is after the project, which means that as soon as you finish one project, you have to then move on to the next one. So it's not like you actually get a break. Finishing a project just means you have to start the next one. It's not, basically, it's this endless cycle. It's a very nihilist way of looking at the universe, very German. Yeah. So, finishing projects. I've got quite a few on my plate, and my clothes need so many repairs. I mean, seams burst, the hems are all worn out. In fact, the worn out hems that I have, I'm going to be redoing those hems in what I now think is a very practical but also very authentic application, which I've discussed in my 15th century Italian Gomorrah videos. And this would apply for any garments that drag on the ground, male or female. Because remember, throughout medieval history, there are periods where men are also wearing clothes that drag on the ground. Conspicuous consumption, everyone, or even that just get close to dragging on the ground. And basically, you take a strip of fabric, a long rectangular strip, and you use it to finish the hem. And a little bit of that strip sticks out below the fashion fabric, so that it's the strip that takes the abuse, that gets dirty, that gets worn down, and then you can just replace that strip. But the shell fabric, the pretty top fabric that you see, remains preserved. So that is what I'm going to be doing going forward on all of the numerous gowns that need repair. Let me see, comment. When active in the Caroleans reenactment, I let my hair grow long, and that's what attracted the mother of my sons to me. I'm not quitting a winning strategy, but I have a coif too. Well, depending on your period of history, long hair was a thing for men as well. 12th century, for instance, long hair, very fashionable. 14th century is when the classic, what people call the page boy look, was very much in vogue. Sort of neatly kempt hair on gentlemen down to like mid-neck, often sometimes even shoulder, always sort of curled under very jauntily. Yep. Yeah, so I will, the winning strategy, but I have a coif too. Yeah. Lucid braid on the bottom of your kirtle. So lucid braid is interesting. There's not any evidence of luciding in the later Middle Ages. There's no visual evidence, and there's no mention of it, and there's not been any archaeological finds of it. so it's very curious, but it could just be one of those deals of it was made of materials that don't survive very well. It was possibly maybe a lower class art, so that it doesn't, that wasn't, it just didn't survive for whatever reason. Yeah. Age 15, you had page hair. That's fun. Yes, please, to the cooking. I would not have medieval. I've not ventured into medieval cooking, but I'd love to. It's, medieval cooking can be both simple and sophisticated. There are some very complicated, like there's this pie recipe I found from Italy. Leave it to the Italians to make a complex pie recipe. That makes literally this immense, like meter wide pie, and it features ravioli and layers of ravioli that you have to make, and layers of meat and layers of sauce and layers of cheese, and it's just this like, I mean, it's this immense undertaking. And it's for special feast days. So, there's that. And then there's the pottage, which is literally just a stew of whatever herbs and vegetables you can happen to find, maybe if you're lucky with some broth. Yeah, but a lucid braid on the bottom of a curdle, that would certainly also be a good thing to take the brunt of of uh, of damage that's done. In the 16th century, the way they finish the bottoms of gowns gets very sophisticated. They actually start doing this multiple layer thing, and then they, on the drive, the really nice ones, they actually put undercolor under the binding, actually little miniature puffs. But the general idea is that you're reinforcing that bottom by providing something else that takes the damage. And considering the kind of wear that my dresses have all exhibited, which is to say they literally just wear away. It's not even a question of you can fix it. You could patch it maybe, and I have done that, but it eventually wear away. So having a separate strip of fabric on the bottom or braiding of some sort, either way, definitely the way to go. And actually the braid on the bottom and the fabric on the bottom also will create extra bulk in the skirt so that it will sit more nicely away from the body. Yeah. Yeah, lucid is certainly, it's a high production thing. A lot of my Finnish friends do finger lucid. They don't even have a lucid. They just use their fingers for it. Yeah. Some people call it finger crocheting, but it's just lucid, really, just with your fingers. Yeah. Finger loop braiding would work also for that purpose. Of course, the problem with finger loop braiding is that you need two people if you're going to make super long braids, which you see a lot. You nearly always see in most of the images of medieval people finger loop braiding, there's two parties involved. It's not one person. There's one person holding a wand, a stick, a baton with a whole bunch of finger loop braiding wrapped around it, and the other person doing the braiding. And the implication is that they probably started very, very far apart. And the person number two, the person holding it, was probably the beater, the person who actually beat the pattern down. And as they weave, she winds it up. And that's probably how they created super long finger loop braiding in the Middle Ages. It was a two-person venture. And it's something, we don't think about, because in the modern world, especially the Western world, we're not as communal minded. We don't think about doing activities together as a natural course of action. But medieval life was so communal that so many activities were predicated on having at least two people present. And we do so much alone now. Yeah. Work on projects alone. We spend a lot of our time isolated and alone. Okay, stepping off of that void. Yeah, so the cooking with the Contessa that I'm going to be doing may or may not be medieval. It might just be me cooking whatever it is I'm going to cook for dinner. And some things happen to be medieval, like a lot of, there are a lot of traditional Chinese dishes, for instance, that are very medieval because you can tell because they have only pre-Columbian ingredients. And for those who don't know, the Columbian exchange, it's a nice way of referring to what happened when Columbus and, kind of encountered the New World. When Europe encountered the Americas in the 15th and 16th century, there was this exchange of goods. And the Columbian, it's referred to as the Columbian exchange, i.e. Columbus. And what Europe got was tomatoes, potatoes, corn, peppers, green beans, some other things, but those are the main ones. potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and pepper. And those, of course, completely revolutionized European cuisine. But it didn't stop in Europe. All of those items also ended up in Asia eventually. So first Europe, then Asia. So red peppers, those are New World. So imagine Korean cuisine without red peppers. That was what it was like before the 18th century. That's how long it took peppers. It was Portuguese traders that brought them eventually. So, ciao Paolo, or Giordano, if you prefer to go by your cognomen. So yeah, the Columbian Exchange really, really revolutionized cuisine. So a lot of recipes from Asia, you can tell if they're post or pre-Columbians, i.e. medieval. If a key feature is pepper, corn, tomatoes, or pepper, corn, potatoes, or tomatoes, then that's a modernized recipe. But if you find a recipe that doesn't have those items in it, then it probably dates to the Middle Ages. Like dongpo pork is a medieval recipe, and actually it's named after Tongpo, a philosopher, a famous Chinese philosopher. And it's called that because he actually made the dish, and he would give it to people wrapped up in little squares. He'd pay people with it in these little squares. And the dish itself has absolutely nothing that was not readily available in medieval Chinese cuisine. And it hasn't been tainted by peppers or tomatoes or potatoes. So it's one of my favorite dishes to make, dongpo pork. Pork belly. Love the pork belly. Oh, Joe. Well, welcome, Joe. It is a pleasure to have you. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We were just talking about cooking at the moment because I'm talking about doing just some live cooking with the Contessa like this, but with cooking. Like I'll be cooking and you can chat with me as I cook. And it may or may not be medieval or historical. It might just be me cooking my own recipe for tomato ragu or something like that. Who knows? We'll see. It's funny. Medieval cuisine, I don't cook medievally often for modern purposes because it's almost sad to me to eat medieval food when it's just me and my condottiero. Because for me, it comes with the sense of a feast, of a gathering of people. And so I almost only like to cook that way if there's going to be a gathering of people. Because I grow sort of sad if there's not a gathering of people to enjoy that. I have to say, of medieval cuisine, my favorite items are pies. I love pies. And whether it's pies with a crust or without a crust, they're generally called torta in Italian. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the almond milk video. I should probably push that one out again because we have so many new people since I last made it, and it's really useful. Almond milk. So for those who don't know, it is super easy to make your own almond milk, to make your own coconut milk, to make your own any nut milk. And the nut milks available commercially in stores are terrible. They're bad for you because they have all sorts of additives that probably have bad, deleterious long-term effects as it gets stored in your body over the decades of consuming them. But besides that, they're expensive and they don't have very much nut in them. Almond milk should really be a 1-to-3 ratio. So it should be 25% almonds. So 25% almond to 75% water is what your nut milk should be made from. Commercially available ones are usually 5%. Same thing for coconut milk is slightly different because it depends on whether you're going for the coconut milk in the cans. That has a much higher ratio of coconut. Or if it's the drink. If it's the drink coconut milk, that is barely coconut milk. It's mostly emulsifiers, stabilizers, and flavor givers, and sugar. Often they add sugar to commercial almond milk and commercial coconut milk if it's a beverage, which for cooking purposes, medieval purposes, almond milk did not have sugar. Normally, there are a couple of recipes where there's they add a teaspoon of sugar to it, but it's not a sweet beverage as such. So it's really good. It's better to make your own if you're using it for cooking purposes, or even just if you're using it to drink and as a substitute for milk in your life. Oh, wow. Tommaso says the irony. As a Nordic person, I'm not lactose intolerant, of course, because any lactose intolerant people die from dysentery probably in Scandinavia. But I'm allergic to almonds. Oh yeah, actually, I have one of my former apprentices is deathly like she needs an EpiPen and medical intervention if if she ingests almonds or almond, even just the slightest bit of almond, anything, her throat closes. So yeah, that is, as a medievalist, it's hard to be allergic to almonds. Because we talked earlier about those Ember days, and the Lenten period, and the other periods of fasting on the medieval religious calendar. And almond milk played a key role in substituting dairy on those days. So that's why so many medieval recipes like blancmange, medieval blancmange, which is chicken and rice, is made with almond milk. I think I found one recipe that suggests you could use plain milk, cow's milk, or almond milk, but most of them call just for almond milk. And I get the impression that milk was just generally turned into cheese. Like there's very vanishingly few recipes that I've encountered that contain cow's milk in medieval cuisine, or cream for that matter. It feels like they may have just turned it all into cheese for preservation purposes, which is, if you think about it, not only does it preserve the milk, but cheese is a really great source of protein and calcium. So, and a good shelf stable source of protein and calcium and fat, which people in the Middle Ages needed desperately, of course. Oh no, sugarcane is an old world plant. It was not New World at all. They didn't have sugar. Yeah, sugarcane is from Indonesia. It's from Southeast Asia. Yeah, so sugar is that's why in even Romans had access to little bits of sugar through the trade routes. But most Roman cuisine, the ancient Roman recipes that we found, when they sweeten, they nearly all sweeten with honey. Ancient Roman cuisine does. Yeah, oat milk is a good choice for Ember days. Maybe they didn't. I've never personally found evidence of oat milk, but I'd rather you keep 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 religiously compliant in the medieval sense, in a way that doesn't kill you, I think is a good choice. Oh yeah, no, cheese lasts way longer than milk. That's why I said shelf stable. It's a shelf stable way of keeping milk. And here's the other thing, again, we have factory farming these days. And so we often just make the assumption that the constant availability of milk that we have was a medieval reality too. But the reality is, to have a cow that produces milk year round, maybe not. And especially if that cow has a calf, her milk needs to feed the calf. So you're not always going to necessarily have access to milk. And we are able to keep cows milking year round these days, but I've read some theories that say that that's not actually necessarily possible in a pre-factory farming world, which means that, yeah, keeping milk shelf stable just as milk, well, I mean, if you have a cold larder, it will keep a couple of days, probably. If you live in Scandinavia in the wintertime, I guess you could put it outside and it will freeze, and you could hypothetically bring it in and let it thaw as you need it. But the practicality of storing large quantities of potentially shelf unstable liquid, it's especially when the storage methods were barrels. Generally, wouldn't like large storage methods for long-term storage in medieval Europe was wooden barrels, and I can just imagine the milk seeping into the wood of the wooden barrels. I'm just thinking, not so much. Just thinking aloud here. Oh, coffee. Coffee did not exist in medieval Europe. Coffee comes from Ethiopia, for those who don't know. And for those who haven't heard the myth of the origin of coffee, it's adorable. I will briefly relate it here. Coffee comes from the highlands of Ethiopia. And the story goes that a shepherd, a goat herd, lost his goats one day. And he couldn't find them. And he went wandering all throughout the hills. And eventually he heard their frantic bleating. And he came across them in a clearing, and they were dancing and frolicking and cavorting and gambling all about in the most insane fashion he'd ever seen. And meanwhile, he noticed that they'd been nibbling on these berries on a bush he had never seen before. And he ate one of the berries and experienced an immediate jolt, because coffee beans are actually berries, for those who don't know, and experienced a solid jolt. And that is apparently the origin story of how coffee came to be introduced to humans. which is why if you ever see a coffee shop that's called the Dancing Goat or something like that, that's why. It's referring to the myth of the origins of coffee. So coffee starts in Ethiopia. And, so the Ethiopians have had it for centuries, maybe even millennia. It dates, the practice of drinking coffee in Ethiopia dates back very, very, very far. And in fact, one of the most prized and expensive coffees, for those who don't know, is coffee that's been eaten, coffee beans that have been eaten and excreted by a civet, which is a cat-like thing, and then excreted out. And then they take the coffee beans from the excrement and use that to make coffee. It's very trendy here in Korea, and it's very expensive, but that's a thing. Cat poop coffee, they call it cutely. Anyway, moving on from that disgusting idea, coffee then spread from there kind of through the Middle East and up into the Ottoman Empire. And it was actually through the connection with the Ottomans in the 17th century that coffee became introduced to Europeans. Yeah, I know, cat poop coffee isn't the most lovely thought. It's amazing what humans will eat under the guise of it's expensive. Pufferfish come to mind, or blowfish come to mind. Like, this could kill me. Let's eat it. So that's how coffee enters Europe in the 17th century. And actually, there's a lot of theories that coffee is responsible for the Enlightenment, because coffee houses opened and it became a place not only where people congregated at pubs before, but they were kind of sousing themselves with first wine and beer and then later distilled spirits like gin, which is really bad for things like thinking. Whereas coffee houses offer people a place to congregate and be perked up and literally awoken. And that sort of stimulated all these new thoughts and exchange of ideas. So there's actually a pretty solid theory that the Enlightenment is thanks to coffee being introduced to Europe in the 17th century via the Ottomans. I'll stick with Jittery Joe's instead of cat poo coffee. Yeah, it's probably a good idea. Or if you want true alliteration, cat caca coffee. That's right. I can wordsmith all day. Yeah, so that's coffee's story in Europe. There is no coffee in medieval Europe. And I'm not certain when the Ottomans exactly got it. I seem to feel like maybe the 16th century is maybe when the Ottomans, when actually coffee houses opened up in the Ottoman Empire, but I could be wrong about that. It may have made it, the Ottomans may have got it earlier too. But it wasn't there. As far as I can tell, coffee was not present in Palestine during the Crusades, for instance. There is no mention of a liquid that perked people up in any of the chronicles from the Crusades that I've read. And I've read a lot of chronicles from the Crusades, thanks to my undergraduate symposium that I attended on the Crusades. Or not a symposium, it was a full semester course on the Crusades. Yeah. But yeah, sugarcane is actually pre-Columbian in Europe. It was mostly used like salt. In most recipes, sugar appears until the 16th century. And actually, you can tell when sugar starts to become more readily available in Europe, because it's being cultivated and produced in sort of the Mediterranean region. And that's because, and then when the sugarcane plantations in the New World opened up and they started bringing it back from there in mass quantities. And that's because the skeletons in the cemeteries, their teeth start rotting. So medieval people had much better teeth because they didn't have access to the vast quantities of sugar that rot teeth. And so you can actually really tell the difference between medieval skeletons and their the teeth and the skulls to 16th century skeletons. And then sort of as time goes on, the tooth situation just deteriorates drastically in the graveyards. Let me see. Yeah, that's when it got to Constantinople, but the Ottomans had it before that, I think, is the point. Remember, the Ottoman Empire is this thing that moved westward. There were different capitals of the Ottoman Empire before they reached Constantinople. The Ottomans had been moving for several centuries before they got to Constantinople. So, yeah, exactly. When the Ottomans got it was kind of what I'm not certain about. Yeah. But yeah, Blake, feel free, or excuse me, Joe, feel free to keep poking around there. see if you can find more information. I'm not going to do that because it'll make my computer stand wobble unappealingly. But yeah, so you can actually track the progress of sugar across Europe with the way people's teeth just rot out of their heads. So tooth decay wasn't nearly the issue in the Middle Ages that people think it was. And that's why actually you often see up until the 16th century, you know, portraits don't show toothless people. Which you can always tell by the way their lips are. But it's sort of the 16th century is when recipes also start to feature sugar in real quantities. That's when preserves, recipes for preserving fruit, basically jams and marmalades like we would know them, called confits or confitures, often in the recipes of the era. That's when it starts being like 70% sugar, 30% fruit. And when that starts happening, that's when the tooth decay really starts. And it was also in the 16th century where literally there would be a final course of a feast that was just molded sugar, and just the high table, the host and his immediate family or his guests of honor would go into a separate room behind the hall and have their sugar board. And it was literally just molded sugar. I mean, beautifully molded into sculptures and looked like plates and fine tableware, but out of sugar plate. And they would just eat just pure sugar, not even like maybe with some rose water to flavor it. So yeah, that's when sugar gets big, but that's because of the sugar plantations in the New World that allow for much easier access to vast quantities of sugar than the sort of smaller sugar plantations that had opened in like Sicily and other parts of the Mediterranean, or that huge massive route all the way from Indonesia all the way to Europe. Was whether you went around the Horn of Africa or came across land, it was just harder to get. But yeah, so 1000 AD, Arab traders bring coffee back to their homeland and cultivate the plant for the first time on plantations. They also began to boil the beans, creating the dark drink, kahwa. Yep. Yeah, Elizabeth I and her love of sugar. Yeah, that poor woman. So yeah, sugar was around for a long time in Europe and Asia, just in Europe, not necessarily in the large quantities until the 16th century. And that's where it all started going downhill for us Europeans and cardiovascular pancreatic health. Hello, diabetes. Yep. And that is, in fact, when you start to really see a spike in physicians talking about sugar sickness, which, is another term for what we would call diabetes. And it was uncurable. Diabetes was a death sentence because most people didn't understand about how to, depending on the type of diabetes. Type 1 was a death sentence for certain. Type 2, most people didn't understand about altering their lifestyle in a way to live with it. So, once your urine started tasting sweet, then it was kind of downhill from there. And that's because remember that physicians used to actually diagnose patients by literally tasting their urine. And I've talked to modern physicians, and they actually say there is a lot you can tell by tasting a patient's urine if you're actually trained in the art. It's not quackery. It's not charlatanism. It's actually effective. First urinalysis was someone drinking your urine. Yeah. You ever seen urine wheels? Medieval manuscripts on medicine, or generally nearly always have medical treatises, always have a urine wheel in them, which literally shows this alarming range of colors that urine could be, from almost white all the way to black. And that black is what scares me a little bit. I think if you have black urine, you should probably write your will and have the last rites said. But yeah, each of those colors, was assigned a specific condition, and, there were recommendations for treatments if your urine was this particular color. And, not all medieval medicine was quackery. Some of it was pretty spot on. In fact, as we're finding out now, there is a definite use for leeches in modern medicine, especially if you reattach limbs. You can put a leech on the attached limb, and it will actually help draw the blood into the new limb. And I guess if you reattach a bigger limb, then maybe you need more than one leech to help draw the blood through. But yeah, and I actually know someone who recently, they told me about a medical condition they have where they actually have to be bled. Like they actually literally perform phlebotomy on them. They bleed them, but they have to. because was it too much iron in their blood or something like that? I was surprised to hear that bleeding can actually have a beneficial effect and not just weaken your patient to the point where they die of whatever it is they actually had. Well, I guess it's possibly a good idea not to throw out everything of the past and maybe to selectively pick through and find the things that still work. I guess that's probably my general takeaway from medievalism in general anyway, is that, there are a lot of, excellent and maybe even superior practices from the past that we've forgotten. Yeah. So the comment is, well, with all your clothes being washed in urine, everyone was tasting urine at some point. Rain soaking your coif and dripping down your face. Well, yeah. So not just urine, fermented urine, because fermenting the urine increases the ammonia content, which is, of course, the key detergent in in why people used urine for laundering things, because it's the ammonia that helps bleach out stains. I mean, they did a thorough rinse, so I really don't think that there is no discussion. I've never read in chronicles about clothes still smelling of urine. They did a thorough job of rinsing them in rivers. Clothes that were washed often, they were boiled and then they were washed in the river, and the rivers did a pretty good job of pretty much rinsing all of the urine out. I doubt that there was still urine residue left in your linen garments. Plus they were then bleached in the sun, and lavender applied and all that sort of stuff. So probably not so much residual urine left, and it's pretty easy to rinse it out. It's very water soluble, so out it goes, as it were. But for certain, urine was much more omnipresent. And for those who don't know, the way that urine was collected, for turning into a laundry detergent, taverns would actually have urinals, like those little urinals you see in some reproduction pottery shops, and they would post them on the walls outside of the tavern, and their patrons would go and urinate in them, and then the tavern keeps would actually sell the urine to dyers, to leather workers, leathersmiths. There's a word for that. People who make leather. To people who make leather, the leather makers, the dyers, and also to the laundresses. And other people who had some other shops would also do this just as an extra form of income, because urine was a precious commodity in medieval Europe. It was a material that was very, very useful. In fact, I plan on experimenting, because I love experimentation. I'm actually planning on experimenting with fermenting some urine and trying to use it to get stains out of some of my linen underthings and see how that goes. So I'm actually planning on doing a stain experiment there's different stain treatments recommended in different dyers' manuals, actually from the Middle Ages, and I plan on trying some of them. Among them are lemon juice, fermented urine, of course, and then there's some other interesting ones. So plan on doing that and doing a video on it and see how Tanners. Thank you. Thank you. I knew there was a better word than leather maker. Christ. Sorry, guys. Yeah. I have also used fermented urine for dyeing with indigo. My recommendation, if you want to experiment with medieval dyeing, do not do it in your apartment like I did, because my apartment stank for days. Because you have to generally bring your pot to a boil or to a very high heat at any rate. And that just basically aerosols all of those lovely volatile chemicals that cause smell. So my apartment smelled of fermented urine for days. And unfortunately, at that point, I had a 2-story apartment, and my bedroom was in the upper part. And of course, all the smells concentrated right in my bedroom. It was great. Yeah. So if you're going to experiment with medieval dyeing, do it outside. Just do yourself this favor, because all of the parts in things involved in medieval dyeing, at least one of them will stink. And if you're unlucky, 2 of them will stink. In my case, the cochineal, which is a louse, it's a bug. And when you cook them, they smell really bad. Yeah. That's true. Yep. Morning urine is recommended for people in an escape and evasion situation to keep away. Can't remember if it's serotonin content when discussing icky content. That's an interesting It's an interesting thought. Yeah, there's got to be something that comes, maybe serotonin from dreaming. Hmm. Let me see. Another comment. I knew that urine was used in tanneries, but not that it was used indigo and woad. Because for indigo and woad dyeing, urine was used, fermented urine specifically. It needs to be fermented to be really effective. And that's because it helps with the color. It's part of the chemical reaction that causes it to turn blue, actually, because indigo and woad are actually, if you look at them, they're green. They're not blue at all. And it's a chemical reaction that turns them that blue color. And so indigo for most of the Middle Ages was not available in Europe. It's not really until the 15th century that indigo starts showing up in the inventories. But chemically, there is no distinction between woad and indigo in terms of the dye stuff. So if they analyze a garment, they can't tell you whether it was indigo or woad because the chemical will be exactly the same. Side tip. Yeah, the comment was you were living in the past for real when I did my dyeing experimentation in my apartment. Yeah, I was experiencing 4D living history. Yeah, it was, and not just the urine smell, it was also the cooked cochineal smell was also absolutely horrific. It was disgusting. Like just the smell of these cooking dead dried insects was terrible combined with the fermented urine. It was hell. Yeah, how they, yeah. So that's the quote comment is, I wonder how, it makes you wonder how they found out that fun fact in the first place, which I'm assuming that urine is the key ingredient in in woad or indigo dyeing. Yeah, there's a lot of that throughout history where it's some kind of disgusting thing that you add to a not disgusting thing to get the right chemical reaction. And I think sometimes it's accidental. Oh, so for instance, pretzels. Do you know how pretzels are created? Pretzels, it's basically just bread dough. But what makes it a pretzel is that it's dipped in a bath of lye. Lye is a solvent, and it will, in high enough concentrations, it will definitely burn your skin and it will dissolve crap. So lye, but historically, lye was used for cleaning things. It's very caustic. And so I actually think, here's my theory about the origin story of pretzels. And this is just my theory. I've never read this anywhere, but I think it's plausible because my theory is that back in the early Middle Ages, a baker's apprentice was cleaning up around the bakery and he was washing up the floor using a bucket of lye because, bakeries needed to be kept clean. Medieval people were big on cleanliness. Everyone remember that. It's a Victorian slur that makes us think they weren't. Anyway, the baker's apprentice was, cleaning up around the bakery and he accidentally knocked a tray of rolls into the vat of lye. Now, as we all know, in the medieval world and even in the pre-industrial world, supplies were super expensive. And especially if those rolls were made from white flour, which was very, very expensive, it was going to be literally his ass on the line if they had to be disposed of. So I think he picked the rolls out of the lye, sort of shook them off and put them back on the tray and just went on about his business as though nothing had happened. And the baker, of course, baked the rolls, and the chemical reaction of the lye on the crust of the dough made this wonderful, chewy, flavorful surface. And I think that's how pretzels were invented. Because otherwise, what person would think, I'm going to take this caustic solution and put it on something I'm going to eat? Yeah. Yeah, right? Fermented for talking about disgusting experiments like sea snails for purple. Yeah, murex for purple. Who is going to, one, let those things sit around and ferment and then actually use it to dye something for to turn your fabric a beautiful shade? Yeah, it has to have been some kind of accident where they were going to eat them and they went off and someone accidentally dropped a linen sheet in it and it, stained it in this pretty color. And so they thought, well, maybe we can do something with this. That would be how murex maybe accidentally got discovered. For the woad, it might have actually been a drunk accident to accidentally figure out that woad or indigo might do better with urine is, some maybe a dyer came home drunk one night from the tavern and really needed to relieve himself, couldn't find his chamber pot, so he just peed in his dye vat. And then the next morning woke up and realized that instead of whatever color he thought it was going to be, it was blue, some shade of blue instead. Maybe that's how they figured out about urine for blue dyes. I don't know. I think about these things a lot, though. Yeah, I really think that most of the disgusting thing discoveries were probably accidents. Although that being said, humans are very inquisitive. We have literally hundreds of millennia of trying out potentially deadly shit just to try it out. And it's kind of one of the things that has allowed our species to thrive. There's been a lot of death along the way in the pursuit of experimentation, but curiosity is how we've evolved. So it's kind of part of our DNA to just go, I wonder what will happen if I take this and mix them together. I mean, acorn, for those who don't know, medieval bread. Wheat flour was super expensive. So your average person didn't get to eat wheat flour bread. Upper lower middle class or upper lower class could maybe do rye or millet. But a lot of the lower classes, they got flours made like chestnut bread or chickpea flour bread or acorn flour bread. Now, here's the thing about acorn flour. Acorns have a toxic level of tannins, and you actually have to soak acorns over a 7-week period in 7 changes of water before you get all of the tannins out of them. So I want to know how that experimentation process went, because the first soaking probably ended in death. The second one probably also in death. The third one maybe in death, but possibly only in excruciating agony for days. Fourth and fifth, sixth, I'm not certain. At what point they kept going until they realized that it was 7 changes of water that were needed to detoxify the acorns so that they could be turned into flour to ground into flour to make into bread that wouldn't kill you. Yeah, I'm not certain, but that's kind of how persistent we humans can be. Let me see. Comment. There's a really interesting experiment done in England where they had a group of bakers bake bread while living in different time periods. There was the BBC did that show where there was they did the different bakeries of different periods, and they were actually figuring it out, like they're modern bakers. Is that the series you're talking about, where it was modern professional bakers, but going back and trying baking bread from different periods and different levels of technology? Yeah, that's a great series. For those who don't know, the BBC is still producing documentaries that are worth watching, unlike the History Channel. And the BBC has a whole bunch of living history productions. There's Tudor Monastery Farm is a must-see for medievalists. Absolute must, because these archaeologists go and live on a monastic farm from 1492 that is still there. And they live there for 12 months, and they actually work the farm and make it successful. And they do all sorts of things. It's like a practical guide to living history. You could literally take notes and recreate what they're doing yourself by watching the shows. Yeah. Tudor Monastery Farm. Then there's Green Valley, which is a early Jacobean farm, 1620s. They live on the same people, live on that farm for 12 days. That same team also goes down to that castle, the medieval castle they're building in Bordeaux. And I think it's only 4 episodes long, but they live and work on the castle, the 13th century castle, as 13th century people. I think that's called Secrets of the Castle. And then there's this bread baking one. And I don't remember, do you remember what the bread baking one was called? Yeah, the bread baking one. Yeah, I wish the USA had something like that. Would totally volunteer. Yeah, you really do. Well, depending on where you are, there are living history places like that. There's the Living History Plymouth Plantation up in Boston. Williamsburg also does a living history interpretation thing. So depending on where you are, there might be on something on a smaller scale, not medieval. Obviously, the earliest is probably going to be in the United States is going to be 17th century, unless St. Augustine were to do like a 16th century Spanish thing. Or maybe something in California might do a 16th century Spanish thing. But there are, up in Washington State near Tacoma, there's the fort, I forget what it's called. there's a fort there outside of the Lewis McChord Air Force joint base, and they do mid 18th century, mid 19th century colonial fort life, and you can go and volunteer there and do that whole experience there. So there are things like that in the United States. Not medieval; it'll be a different period of history. But on the other hand, living history is living history. So it could be just as interesting and fun as doing something in a medieval setting. Just different clothes, maybe slightly higher tech. Well, maybe not, depending. Yeah, was it called Victorian Farm? I thought the baking, it was different periods of baking though, not just Victorian. Or are you talking about Victorian Farm as another series? Yes, right. Yeah. So Victorian Farm is another BBC series where they live and work a Victorian farm. I think they also did an Edwardian Farm, I feel like. Yeah, another good BBC series I can recommend, Worst Jobs in History, which is also a living history style thing, where Tony Robinson of Blackadder fame and Time Team fame goes and actually tries out some of the most disgusting, horrifying jobs throughout various periods of history, starting with ancient Roman. And so you actually get to see and experience these various, aspects of historical life. Oh yeah, there's also a Wartime Farm series that the BBC did. BBC, man, they're still producing quality content, quality documentaries without bombastic reenactment scenes and unnecessary music. And although they are starting, some of them are starting to go a little melodramatic. There's certain historians they get who just grind on me because they're so a little over the top, a little much. Yeah, Tudor Monastery Farm was the one where that I was talking about. Yeah, that's my favorite one because it's kind of my period, 15th century. Although the dancing they show there is not very 15th century, but that's me being severely pedantic. Yeah, Tudor Monastery Farm is the best for a medievalist. Absolute must see. Also, Secrets of the Castle I feel like is a must see for medievalists. Ruth Goodman, I will admit she grates on me a little bit. I like what she says, but how she says it sometimes just gets under my skin a little bit, but that's just me. But the content is top. Yeah, Fort Ticonderoga definitely has an interpreter, used to anyway, have an interpreter thing. Yeah, so that castle in France, that's called, the series is Secrets of the Castle, where the BBC historians, that group of BBC archaeologists and historians, goes and lives in the 14th century castle in Burgundy. That's Secrets of the Castle. I think it's a 4-part series. Very good. Also quite good. Yeah, highly recommended for living history. Yeah, Lady Justice mentioned Fort Ticonderoga in New York. Yeah, there used to be an interpreters in Ticonderoga. I'm assuming maybe there still are, or there are again since the pandemic. My aunt used to live in Ticonderoga, New York. So whenever I would visit her, we would go to Fort Ticonderoga. Saw as a little girl, seeing the life-size diorama of the Scottish soldier with his leg blown away playing the bagpipe sitting on the ground was really traumatic, actually. Oh God. Oh, there's a US series called Colonial House. Oh, it's a reality show though, that's probably more like reality TV is, where it's not really real, that kind of thing. Because Tudor Monastery Farm is not at all reality show the way Americans understand reality show. It's actually people just living that way. The most drama that happens is when one of the pigs gets out. Or no, when they go to wash the sheep in Tudor Monastery Farm. Yeah, my favorite drama moment there is when they go to wash the sheep to take them to market, and they try to do it in the pond, and the sheep are just having none of it. I think the sheep get dirtier rather than cleaner. But yeah, the American tendency towards melodrama for reality shows. I'll be honest, when I first heard of the concept of reality TV, he was with Survivor, the series Survivor, when I was a little girl. And when I heard about this series, I literally thought they were going to just airdrop 10 people onto a deserted island with nothing, with hidden cameras everywhere, and just see what happened. That's what I thought it was going to be. I didn't realize it was going to be a goofy game show. Yeah, there have been a couple of more reality show. And now that I think about it, the BBC has done a couple of reality show style historical series. I think Edwardian House, I think, was one of them, where it really ended up being more of a, well, the mistress said this and I just resent it totally because I'm not actually a servant, but she's really so full of herself. Like there was a lot more of that. It wasn't people just living and working it. It was, it was all this struggle and melodrama that sprang up. So it wasn't like the BBC Ruth Goodman and oh god, I can't remember the names of her colleagues. It wasn't like that where they're literally just trying to historically work this farm. Yeah, there is a little bit of melodrama on the BBC, some BBC series as well, but not as much. Not as much. Yeah. Okay, well, everyone, it's been almost 2 hours now. Are there any final questions or comments? And for those who might be watching this as a recording, there might be a few extra minutes while we wait for the questions and comments to come in. Alex and Peter and Tom. Yes, that's it. Alex, Peter, and Tom. Yeah. I love Peter and Tom they're just great. I love the kind of camaraderie they get, and they make such fun, witty comments in the series. I love their their commentary. It's pretty great. Some of the most fun of that series is their interactions. Yeah, I love it my favorite one scene in Tudor Monastery Farm is where they go to plow the fields with the only working pair of oxen left in the United Kingdom, and these oxen haven't plowed fields in years, and they've just been getting fat and happy in the pasture for years, and they go and try to use them to plow the fields. That was great. Oh, thank you for joining in, Carrie. Carrie, thank you so much. I really was glad to see you here. Any final comments? Any final questions? Yeah, I rewatched the Tudor, all of those farm living history series once a year as well. They're worth watching. Yeah, the next one will probably be a cooking with me for anyone who wants just to hang out and watch me cook and listen to me hold forth while I cook. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, everybody. Okay. Oh, it's cool. We were late too because we had complete technical failure. So thank you for coming, despite probably the issues trying to find the live Q&A, since we had to switch gears for it. So any final questions or comments? Oh, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed me holding forth about in a very stream of conscious sort of way about every kind of topic you all suggested. Have a lovely evening, everyone. If you have any follow-up questions when this thing posts, just post them in the comments and we can discuss them in the next Q&A, or I can answer them briefly in the comments. Thank you all for your support. Look forward to the next one, everyone. Bye. Just waiting for any final comments.